So thank you for coming. Thanks for joining this particular conversation. I've been playing the role of Jimmy Kimmel this afternoon with Barb as my guest, so if I don't survive until the next show, you'll understand why. Barb, why don't we kick this off? You and I have known each other a long time. We worked as U.S. attorneys together. We worked on terrorism matters and others together, and you've gone on to this illustrious career on MSNBC. I might add that I've never been invited on MSNBC. Just throwing out ideas here. How did you get into writing this particular book? What brought you to it? And I don't need a show of hands, but if you haven't read the book, read it. Read it before you read Kamala Harris's book. Read it now, because it's really important. It's filled with information we all need. So how did you get into this particular topic?
Well, thanks very much, Andy. But before I answer that question, I just want to say thanks so much for the invitation to be here. Thank you, Andy, for agreeing to moderate this. We are old friends from our time together as U.S. attorneys in the Obama administration. Both of us focused on issues of countering violent extremism even back then. And so it's wonderful to be back here with you today. Back then, Andy hosted a conference on countering violent extremism, and I had a chance to do one of the things I love most in this world, which was to go see a baseball game at Target Field and see the Minnesota Twins play, which was great. And then today, yeah, go Twins! I'm happy to cheer on the Twins. And then today, Andy and I had a chance to go see the Golden Gophers, victorious over Rutgers. So I'm extra grateful to Andy for that opportunity. So thank you for that. But to answer the question about what brought me to write this book on disinformation, this is a topic I've been looking at for a long time. Before I was U.S. attorney, I was an assistant U.S. attorney working on national security cases. And so one of the biggest threats to our national security is information warfare. And after I left the U.S. Attorney's Office, I started teaching at the University of Michigan Law School, or as we call it there, the other U of M. But one of the topics I cover, and frankly, a topic that has now occupied a larger and larger portion of my syllabus in that course, is information warfare. In the last administration, the Department of Homeland Security said that information warfare was the top threat to the American homeland. And it's absolutely true. Some of it comes from outside the United States. You know, the Robert Mueller report on Russian election interference in the 2016 election is a fascinating read, and I have my students read it. Not for what he did or did not conclude about the Trump campaign, but for what he did conclude about the Russian efforts to use disinformation to try to persuade Americans, to sow discord in society, to undermine confidence in elections, and to push their preferred candidate in that election. It was about what was in the best interests of Russia. But since 2016, we have now seen many American political operatives adopt the same tactics that we saw coming from Russia back then, and it is a significant threat. And so what I wanted to do with this book is to explain to a wide audience of non-lawyers what I teach my law students. That is, to recognize the tactics of disinformation so that we can build resilience against them and be less likely to be manipulated by them, because they are a serious threat to our democracy, to our public safety, and to our national security.
And is it getting better or is it getting worse?
You know, it's hard to measure these things, but in my view, it is getting worse.
And is it technology that's caused? Go ahead.
I think that there are a couple factors that are really driving it at this moment. You know, disinformation has been around forever in one way or another, you know, whether you want to call it propaganda. It's been around for centuries. But I think two things right now are making it particularly acute. One is technology. So any one of us now has the ability for the first time in world history to send a message, to reach millions of people, to send it instantly, to make the content false, and to do so anonymously. That's an incredibly powerful weapon. You know, in some ways it's wonderful, right, to be able to reach anybody around the world, but it can also be used for negative things as well. And the anonymity, I think, is a really important part of it. One of my favorite New Yorker cartoons is this one, it goes back to like the 90s. Do you remember this one? There are two dogs, one sitting at a computer keyboard and another sitting next to him, and the one at the keyboard is saying to his friend, "On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog." Well, similarly, on the internet, nobody knows you're a Russian, right? So you can be in St. Petersburg, Russia, working for the Internet Research Agency, you know, wearing a hoodie, doing your thing, and posing as they did in the 2016 election, someone with the name Blacktivist, or someone with the name Tennessee GOP, or someone called Heart of Texas, or United Coal Miners of America, or Army of Jesus. And so when people see those messages, they think that that is somebody who represents their group, and that when they say things, they are persuaded by them. And so that technology, I think, has really made all of this dangerous, and it's only gotten worse now with deep fakes and artificial intelligence, fake videos, fake audios, and other kinds of things. But that is not it alone. The other thing is our incredibly polarized politics. And you know, I don't want to be a both sides-er, but I do in some ways blame both sides, because the increased use of data has allowed both sides to recognize that it is better to mobilize your own base than to try to entice swing voters or moderates or independents to vote for you. And so what they do is demonize their opponent in an effort to raise the stakes and suggest that this is the most important election ever. You have to vote as if your life depends upon it, because it does, because if that other side wins, we'll all be speaking Russian, or if the other side wins, we will have anarchy in our lands. And so it means that there are often in elections what's called double haters, people who stay home from the polls, and they're just fine with that, because if those people show up at the polls, they might vote for the other guy. What I'd rather do is have those people stay home and my base be mobilized and show up in numbers and vote for me. So it's maybe a good formula for winning elections, but it is a terrible formula for governing. And so we see people demanding this political purity, and it allows people to believe what they want to believe. And so we have people saying, sure, Joe Biden has the mental acuity to run for president again. Maybe not. Or, you know, there's something called Antifa that is committing violent crime in our cities and must be stopped and designated as a terrorist organization. If people want to believe those things because they now align with their team, it's all us versus them, red versus blue, then we are inclined to believe those things that we want to believe because we've been so conditioned to see our political rivals as our enemies.
One of the things you talk about in the book is that we think of the goals of disinformation as to benefit one side or the other. And you talk in the book about, for a lot of people who are spreading this, it's really just to sow discord in our society. And that it's to rile us up and to get us angry about things that really don't even matter. One, is that the case? And two, what do we do about that?
Yeah, so one of the conclusions of the Mueller report is that one of Russia's goals was simply to sow discord in American society. And so they chose the fault lines that they could find: abortion, guns, immigration, affirmative action, all of the hot button issues in society. And then they would post false messages just to get people fighting with each other. And if you look at these things online, you will see how the responses go back and forth. There was a time when I fell for some disinformation. I know, hard to believe, even me. I probably fall for it all the time. But there was a post online that said, Patrick Mahomes, the NFL quarterback for the Kansas City Chiefs, had issued a statement saying he would not play another down for the Kansas City Chiefs until they changed their name to something that was not offensive to Native Americans. And I thought, oh, way to go, Patrick Mahomes. Good for you. Good job. So I, posted some, way to put your money where your mouth is, Patrick Mahomes, or something like that. Later that day, I was discussing it with my husband, and he said, I haven't seen that. And actually, you know what? It sounds kind of fake. And I said, now that I say it out loud, it sounds kind of fake to me, too. But I went back, I said, but it looked right, it looked real, it was genuine, it was authentic. And I went back and I found it on my post, and it was posted by ESPN, right, legitimate source, and it was from their flagship brand, Sports Center. But then I looked a little more closely, and I realized it did not say Sports Center, it said Sprots Center. Oh, so it was a fake. And I started Googling to see if I could find a second source for the story, and it wasn't. So it was a fake. But what was interesting is I looked at all the comments back and forth, and sure enough, it stoked all kinds of arguments, arguing about people like, you woke such and such, how dare you destroy the great traditions of the Kansas City Chiefs? And then, of course, other people on the other side is, how dare you take on these offensive names and belittle a great people for your amusement? Back and forth, back and forth. So this is the kind of stuff that gets thrown out there, and it is simply to cause discord in American society. And I think in many ways they are fabulously successful. I don't know who posted it there. Some of it is Russia and China and other hostile foreign adversaries who want to see us. I mean, think about what we do these days in our Congress. All we do is spend our time investigating the last Congress or the last administration. And what are we not doing? We are not addressing serious problems or organizing ourselves to advance issues in the world, like climate change or world peace or trade agreements, other kinds of things that we could be doing together to advance the human condition. Instead, we're arguing with each other right where our adversaries want us. But it's not just our adversaries, Andy. There are people who on the political left and right who want to do these things. But there's also this whole nihilist movement of people who just want to burn it down. Some of them are just anarchists. There's also this whole movement in the tech industry, Curtis Yarvin and others, who see this vision of destroying American institutions as they currently exist and replacing them with some sort of oligarchy run by tech geniuses who could solve our problems. It's kind of an authoritarian regime that would put prosperity over democracy. So there are a lot of forces that are looking to do this. Now, what you asked me is, how do we solve it? That's a much harder question. I think there's
That's why it took you a while to get to it. I wanted to say... I could hear the wheels turning.
Yeah,
but go ahead.
I was hoping we could, just be, I'd say the end, be done. But there are solutions. I think there are solutions to these things. One, there's plenty of legislative solutions. As Senator Klobuchar here has proposed some efforts about taking down deep fakes on social media. I'm an advocate of labeling deep fakes on social media. Not so much removal. That would permit people to do satire and other things that are deep fake, but labeling, so that if it appears to be Kamala Harris at a rally doing things, or Senator Klobuchar making statements, we know because it's labeled that it was a deep fake, so we are not confused into believing that people really said these things that might be horrible things that could be harmful to their reputations. So I think there are some things that we can do from a legislative perspective, but I also think there are things we can do from kind of the demand side, ourselves, right? Education, teaching people good media literacy tactics. They have actually done this in Finland for decades. Because of their proximity to Russia, they have been bombarded with Russian talking points for decades. And so they now teach in schools good media literacy. I have a bunch of tips in the book about this, but some of them are just looking for a credible source, looking for a second source. If only I had taken my own advice before I retweeted the Patrick Mahomes story. But it's really just some basic common sense critical thinking, because what we don't want to happen is for members of the public to do what they do in Russia, and that is to say nothing can be believed. We don't believe anything the government says. That's kind of infotainment. We don't believe anything the media says because that's all controlled by the press. So we check out, we disengage, we focus only on our work and our family, and we don't participate in politics because that's all rigged anyway. We don't want that to happen in America. What we do want to happen is for people to be able to recognize that which is accurate and that which is false by building those tools. I think there will always be somebody who is able to cheat the system, but if we can build in these preventive measures, I think that's the way to go. You know, Andy, and you and I worked on criminal law enforcement, and certainly trying to stay ahead of bad actors is an important part of law enforcement. You pass laws, you enforce them, you prosecute people, you convict them, and you punish them. That's an important part of it. But you'll never be able to imagine every possible crime that can occur or prevent every kind of crime from happening. So what do? You increase prevention efforts. And I think by building good resilience among the people through formal education programs in school, through programs at faith communities, community colleges, public libraries, civic organizations, we can build that resilience ourselves, or we can ourselves take it upon ourselves to learn how to recognize those signs of disinformation.
And you mentioned nihilism. I don't know how many people, studied nihilism when they were in college, but it's a non-ideology ideology. It's a belief that nothing matters, society doesn't matter, nothing works. And it's become now, in 2025 in particular, a gathering spot for disillusioned people online. And so there are now online networks of people who sort of ascribe to the notion that nothing can improve, nothing can matter, we can't do anything. And what we've experienced here this summer in Minneapolis and Minnesota is a bit of an example of what's happening around the country, with two horrendous acts of violence sort of bookending our summer, with the murder of Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark, and the shooting of the Hoffmans, and then the Annunciation shooting. Researchers, and I want to make sure we get this point across because it all comes together. Disinformation, hostility toward social structures have now morphed online, so there are sites where people go to sort of encourage each other to engage in school shootings and mass murders. One of them is called, one of the most prominent is called Watch People Die. And believe it or not, I talked to an expert yesterday who told me that there are over 2 million subscribers to Watch People Die, where they venerate and talk about and put on pedestals the latest of the mass murderers. Part of this, Barb, is as a society, as a culture, our coming to grips with the internet communication that we've created and social media. So one of it is deep fakes and disinformation, whether it's the Patrick Mahomes hoax or the one that every single person in this room has gotten, you owe this bill, you owe these taxes, click here. And I can't, maybe it's the same for you, as a former prosecutor, or even when I was a prosecutor, almost every week I'd get an email from somebody or a text from somebody saying, is this real? Should I pay this bill? We need, and maybe some of you have asked yourself the same question, and I've known people who've lost tens of thousands of dollars just by clicking the wrong thing. We need to educate ourselves on these technologies, on this effort, on what's happening here, whether it's coming from Russia, like you said, or we're doing it internally to ourselves. What are you working on next? Where are you? I know you, and you don't stay still for one moment, and you shouldn't. You're brilliant and thoughtful. So where are you going with all of this next? Do you have another book in? Let's get a preview here. Do you have another book in mind? Is there something that you're working on that we can learn about that maybe you haven't talked about on MSNBC yet, that we can get a sneak preview of?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. I am working on another book. It's actually called The Fix. It comes from the idea that the fix is in, and that the current administration runs a bit like an organized criminal mob. I think it's not hard to imagine some of the things we've seen, right? I mean, extortion of law firms, universities, the media. You mentioned Jimmy Kimmel, right? I mean, that is extortionate behavior. I mean, these charges against Jim Comey, love him or hate him or both, the demand by President Trump to Pam Bondi to file these charges should be troubling to all of us. So I'm working on a book. It's called The Fix, and the idea is to take some of the lessons that we have learned in our work as prosecutors and figure out how we dismantle criminal organizations, but not just, responding to something we don't like, but building a vision for something we do. And so how do we safeguard our democracy going forward? And one of the great things about the Trump administration is that he has done a very good job of issue spotting for us. We have found a lot of the weaknesses, right? Declaring of emergencies is one spot. A very muscular assertion of executive power is another place. Destroying some of the norms at the Department of Justice, saying I am the chief law enforcement officer, not the attorney general, and I'm going to direct how those resources get used. And so what can we do to build safeguards, guardrails in our system? After the Nixon-Watergate affair, we had some guardrails that got put in place to prevent that from happening in the future. How can we look at this moment to put some guardrails in place to protect some of the abuses that we are seeing? And not just from the Trump administration, from some of these other bad actors who want to tear it all down, or from nihilism. I think it also has to include a vision of substantive policy. Like, how do we deal with immigration? And not just removing people who are unlawfully here, but how do we create an immigration system that works, where people can get visas to come into the country? We have all kinds of worker shortages. How do we methodically fill that? Instead of just fear-mongering that immigrants are bad, scary people who want to hurt us, how do we have an immigration system that actually works for us? Violent crime. You and I know that violent crime is a problem in many American cities, but sending troops to the cities is not the way to solve that problem. That creates an occupying army, and it may suppress violent crime for a short period of time while the troops are present. But it creates a police state and civil unrest. And the way to actually do that is through community-based policing. And we know how to do that. We've done it. The reason that we've seen a decline in violent crime in many cities in America in recent years is because of those strategies that work. So I'm trying to put together a book called The Fix that addresses not only the problems and how we deal with those, but ways to fix what's wrong in our country that is causing so much anger, in hopes of providing a vision for a better future.
So I'm fascinated by that, because one of the reasons I went back to be U.S. Attorney a second time is I saw the problem that we had. We had a violent crime spike in Minneapolis like we've never seen before. And, the joke is I moved here from New York in 1992 as a prosecutor, worrying that I would be bored, that there'd be nothing to do. Okay, so I learned. And when I became U.S. Attorney the second time, we had a spike in shootings, murders, carjackings, a lot of it tied to gangs. And when I met with all law enforcement, it was clear that there was a solution out there, and we used RICO really for the first time in Minnesota. They used it in Detroit ahead of us. It's okay, we're catching up. But we ended up indicting 100 gang members under RICO and related statutes, not one of whom was an illegal immigrant. Not one of whom was born anywhere but North or South Minneapolis. And so saying that, which I did because, you get this campaign of all the crime is coming from here. No, it's coming from right in our backyard. Let's address what's really here, not some fictionalized account from somewhere else. So I appreciate your talking openly and honestly. We have problems. We have problems in Minnesota. We have problems around the country, but they all have solutions. If there isn't a problem that we can't solve if we don't tell the truth, act reasonably, and admit our mistakes. Both Barb and I served as U.S. attorneys. Some of the things that we tried, I will admit, didn't work, so you try something else. It's part of the process of being good at leadership, is admitting when you make a mistake and trying something else, but not being afraid to try, as long as you're open and honest. And I know that's how you led your office. When you travel around the country, as you do, you're here, you're going to be in Texas, you're elsewhere, both talking about the book and about your journey, What are you getting back from your audiences? What are you hearing either from being on TV or speaking like this? Are people hopeful? Are they optimistic? Where are they in their dialogue with you?
Yeah, I find that people are fearful, angry, frustrated, confused about this moment, surprised that we've reached this point in America, but engaged. And that is what gives me hope. I mean, look at this room. Look at this event today. There have been so many people here eager for dialogue, eager to hear all of these different sessions, looking for commonality. We all have differences in this country, right? Different views and different opinions, and that's okay. I think that people yearn to reach some sort of compromise, and what's so interesting is when you are together in a room, unlike when you are working from home online or watching television, it's easy there to feel anger toward your enemy. But when you are together, I think there is an effort to find common ground. And I think one of the things that has caused so much polarization in recent years is our decreasing engagement in society, right? Working from home, lots of virtual this and virtual that, and less joining. Robert Putnam wrote a book in 2000 called Bowling Alone. You know this book? And he was concerned in 2000 that people were no longer joining bowling leagues or civic organizations because they were staying home watching television. That was even before we had the internet and we had the COVID pandemic that caused people to work from home. I think, however, we are seeing people coming back. We yearn for human connection. And so when I am out talking to people, I see that, and I see that in this community. That's what gives me hope. Even if you may have differences of opinion on various policy issues, that's okay. But what we want to instill is a common goal to improve our democracy and the processes that we have to solve those policy differences.
So a couple of questions from the audience. After years of dumbing down public education and even a revival of book banning, why are we optimistic that we can do better in promoting critical thinking? Why are we optimistic? I'll go with you first. You're more optimistic than I am. But give us some reasons for being optimistic given sort of what we seem to be learning in civics and in critical thinking.
Well, one of the things is we have seen a decline in civics education in many school districts as STEM education has replaced it. And that is a concern. STEM education is certainly very important, but not at the expense of civics education. I think this is a moment of awakening. Why should we be optimistic? I think that some of the problems that we are experiencing are still relatively new. The internet is still a pretty new animal. It's only been around really as a function in our lives for the past, 15 years? It's reached sort of those awkward teenage years. First, it was fun and exciting, and now we have seen all the ways that it can be harmed. But I think we're becoming more savvy. I think most of us no longer fall for the Nigerian prince email that comes online, right? Because we've lived and learned. And I think in the same way, we are learning that we need to empower our young people and ourselves with education to address these things. When the airplane was first invented, I suppose it was by the Wright brothers, but maybe that's just disinformation, and I don't know who really invented the airplane. But when it was invented...
They played a role.
They played a role. That's a good way to put it. Great invention, right? I flew here from Detroit. What an incredible luxury this is to be able to experience air travel. But everything that gets invented also has a downside, right? To invent the airplane is also to invent the plane crash. And so for a time we said, we wrung our hands. What are we going to do about the plane crash? But then we figured it out, right? We created the FAA. We created some regulation around it. We are now, we regulate the building of planes, the inspection of planes, the flying of planes, the air traffic controllers in planes, how much time the crew must rest before they get on another plane. All of those things make air travel extremely safe. And so I am optimistic that we will come around to the point that we need to make the internet safe, similarly through some common sense, reasonable regulation. We'll get there, but it needs good people. It's not going to happen by itself, who are engaged in the process to make that happen. I don't think giving up is an option. And I think the fact that you are all here today tells me that you don't think giving up is an option either.
So I'm going to follow that up with another question, but I'll take a brief commercial break because you talk about inventions. The people who invented MinnPost are here, the Kramers, and I just want to give them a round of applause. What great foresight in coming. It's been I miss the Minn roast. I don't know if anybody used to come to that, but this is wonderful also. So follow up to is a question about the internet. Would you do anything to change anonymity on the internet, which you spoke about earlier, Barb?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And in fact, in the book, I suggest that perhaps we ought to eliminate anonymity on social media, because that could be a term of service. But I think I have changed my mind on that. Anonymity is certainly a problem, and using a false name is a problem. But I think that there is value in anonymity, as I have seen what we have seen from the current Trump administration of cracking down on voices that speak dissent. I think there can be value in someone who wants to remain anonymous and say something. It goes back to like Publius back in the day, right, of the founding fathers. Or Ben Franklin had a fake name. What was his? He was like Mrs. Somebody or other. What is it? Somebody, who is it? Silas Dogood. Yeah.
Harry Field gets the points there.
Yeah, thank you. Silas Dogood, who could write things, obviously a fake name. So I think I have come around on the idea that anonymity is good. However, I think that we all need to read what we see online with a grain of salt, right? If you are reading something that is posted from the account of the New York Times or the MinnPost, perhaps you can accept that as being credible. If, however, you are reading something from the account of someone with a name like Patriot Girl 1776, maybe you should take that one with a grain of salt. So I think, I come around so often back to the idea that it's mostly education, because there will always be somebody trying to game the system. And so I think if we read those things with our eyes wide open, then we can process that information in an informed way.
So here's a question that we actually were talking about right before we came on. Can a reform like ranked choice voting address the polarization problem? We actually had a conversation about this.
Yeah, so I have the view that in theory it makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, ranked choice voting in theory will help neutralize some of these more extreme voices and allow compromise. So maybe your first choice doesn't get picked, maybe the second or third choice is one that everybody comes around to, and then it prevents that extreme candidate from coming in when voters split the votes on other things. But in talking with Andy, I know you have it here in Minneapolis, maybe it hasn't lived up to its promise. We're seeing that in New York right now too, with the mayor's race, where we've got kind of the top two occupy all the oxygen, and then factions of others gang up and try to knock out the top one. So I don't know if that works. There's another theory that it might be better than ranked choice voting. It really might only work best for congressional districts, but it is considered the popular vote doctrine. There are political scientists who've advocated this. And it is to address polarization in Congress. There's a huge percentage of districts that are now reliably blue or reliably red. And so people don't even bother to challenge the incumbent. They just know it's going to stay red, it's going to stay blue. What's the point? And so it allows people to be very extreme. And it encourages people to be very extreme. It's the reason Liz Cheney lost her seat in Wyoming, even though she's very conservative, because she got outflanked by an even farther right-wing MAGA, supporter after Liz Cheney, favored the impeachment of Donald Trump and was on the January 6th committee. But the way this works is, in a congressional district, you get more than one member of Congress. You might get 5 members of Congress. It would require a huge expansion of Congress. But instead of having 1 member, you get maybe 5. And it gets apportioned based on the vote. So rather than having 1 red or 1 blue, what you might get is 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans representing that district. And the ultimate result in Congress as a whole is having less of this polarization and more moderation. And so maybe that's a better solution to ranked choice voting. I don't know if it works in every race like a mayor's race or others, but it might help make Congress a little more moderate and represent the views of more moderate voters.
All right. So I was an advocate of ranked choice voting 20 years ago when it first was introduced, and I've been disappointed, and I've come to the conclusion, and I'll confess, I am a self-proclaimed moderate Democrat. You get called all sorts of names when you say you're a moderate Democrat. You get called Republican, for God's sakes. I think the best way to address polarization is to demand moderate candidates win. And those who win really control the dialogue, and I believe in, if you're a moderate, if you're not a moderate, then close your ears. But if you're a moderate, support moderate candidates and demand that the candidates that you support adopt more moderate policies and approaches and conversations with, quote unquote, the other side. That's my view. I was a big believer in this. I don't think it's been as successful as we had hoped. That doesn't make it a bad thing. It just means something else has to be tried. So I'm diving in to any candidate that wants my support, and I, like you, I get the emails and the calls. I just demand moderate candidates, and I think we got a shot in the next few years, given what we're living through, of seeing some success in that regard.
Yeah, I just want to say I think there's more of us than them, right? Moderates. My original Twitter handle, what my description was that I was an extreme moderate. But our current system rewards extremism,
I know.
and yet it is that sense of the middle where candidates have worked so hard to get their base to turn out and ignored the moderates, but it's a large group, it's a large voting block for the taking.
So I think we have time for a couple more questions. Apparently we do. Here's one. We mentioned RICO because I'm a big fan of the use of that statute under the right circumstances in the right ways. Question, do you think there's a risk of abuse of RICO by the current administration to suppress political views?
Ooh, that's a very interesting question. So RICO stands for Racketeering, Influence, and Corrupt Organizations. It's a statute federally that was passed in 1970 at a time when organized crime was very prominent throughout the country. The RICO statute is used to address organized crime, criminal organizations. So you have to prove that the group is an organization, that's an element, that they're engaging in a pattern of racketeering activity, which just means organized crime, and that they have committed at least 2 of a specific list of crimes. Most of those are violent crimes like arson and murder. The crime can be a federal or state crime, which makes it a really nimble tool for street gangs. Oftentimes, it's things like drive-by shootings and carjackings and arsons. It also includes gambling to go after organized crime groups, money laundering, and other kinds of things. So political activity often doesn't meet those qualifications, but I suppose to the extent we are seeing, really broad application of crime, I don't know that I'm confident that the current administration would avoid it, but I think the kinds of crime that are included under RICO would probably prevent it. I'll tell you what I'm more worried about. We have seen President Trump recently designate Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization. Now, there's a lot of things wrong with that. First, Antifa is not an organization. Some of the things we dealt with that are organized were Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Hezbollah, Hamas. Some of those organizations are designated terrorist organizations. They have a structure, they have leadership, they have membership, they have bank accounts. Antifa is a philosophy. You could no more designate Antifa a criminal organization than you could designate feminism, which may be next, or the patriarchy, right? It's a thought, it's a philosophy. It's not an organization. But the other thing is, it is illegal. There's no law that authorizes the designation of a domestic terrorist organization. It is for foreign organizations. And the reason we limit it to foreign organizations is concerns about just what we're talking about here, going after politically motivated groups. So you can't go after the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers or the ACLU or the League of Women Voters as terrorist organizations because the law does not permit that. But could we see some overreach? Could we see a designation of Antifa and a prosecution for that? Because once you're designated, it's a crime just to provide any kind of goods, money, or services to that organization. So if we designate the League of Women Voters and you are on the board or you make a donation, could that be a crime? Gee, I sure hope not. But I think it would fail in court. But just being charged with a crime, of course, we know, is itself a punishment. So I'm hopeful that the criminal justice system will protect us all, but I do worry about some of the lawless activity of the current administration.
Final question. Let's go back to something that you talk about in your book that a questioner asked. How do we get America back on track where we agree on science and we agree on basic facts? Because we've gotten off track there, and in order to ward off authoritarianism, but also the sowing of discord in our community, this is a big question, so you got a minute or two to answer it. How do we get ourselves, because there was a time when we seemed to have basic agreement on the factual information that we then use to make our own decisions?
Yeah, this is one that's really vexing to me as somebody who works in higher education. The idea that, there is this political rhetoric that, you shouldn't go to college, you shouldn't go to higher education, that these are elites that look down on you. I mean, this has been a narrative that has been at work for decades now, and it's, attacking science, attacking medicine. Part of that really does seem to go to nihilism, but I think it is also about political opportunism. One thing I fear is talking and educating our friends is one way, and our families and our neighbors, but I fear that we might have to see the results before people are going to come around. So a return of measles, already outbreaks in Texas already going on, a return of polio. I think people will eventually see and believe, I think, and maybe that's going to be what it takes before people come around. Climate change, how many people have to suffer illness of climate? How many wildfires and hurricanes and floods are we going to have to endure? But at some point, I think, even those who are drinking the Kool-Aid now will have to come around and believe the evidence and the science. But I worry that it may take a long time before we get there. But we don't have to wait for the doom and gloom, right? We all have the power to get out and do something, whether it's working with the League of Women Voters or the ACLU, or talking to your friends and neighbors, or voting or registering others to vote. We all have the power to do something to make our democracy better and stronger. We don't have to wait for someone else to lead us there. We all have the power in a democracy to make change today, and I hope you'll do that.
Barbara McQuade.